The blood on her skirt had dried to a rust-colored stain by the time Beatrice Sullivan collapsed in the middle of the prairie, her vision swimming with exhaustion and pain as the August sun beat down mercilessly on the Nebraska grasslands in 1875. She had been walking for 3 days since the wagon train was attacked by bandits near the Platte River, and her ankle, which she had twisted while scrambling away from the chaos and gunfire, had swollen to twice its normal size. Every step had become agony, and now, with Kearney still miles away according to the last sign she had passed, her body simply refused to carry her any further. She heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching and felt her heart seize with terror, wondering if the bandits had circled back to finish what they had started. Her hand fumbled for the small knife she had tucked into her boot, but her fingers were so numb and clumsy that she could barely grip the handle. The rider came closer, and through the haze of heat and exhaustion, she could make out the shape of a single man on a dark horse, leading another mount behind him. "Madam," the voice was deep and cautious, tinged with concern rather than menace. "Madam, are you hurt?" Beatrice tried to push herself up to a sitting position, but her arms trembled and gave out. She felt the hot sting of tears in her eyes, furious with herself for showing such weakness, but she was beyond the point of maintaining her pride. The man dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud, and within seconds he was kneeling beside her, his shadow providing blessed relief from the relentless sun. "Easy now," he said, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching, as if he understood the delicacy of the situation and did not want to frighten her further. "My name is Harrison Tucker. I work at the ranch about 5 miles northeast of Kearney. What happened to you?" Beatrice blinked up at him, trying to focus on his face. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in winter, a pale green-gray that seemed to hold genuine worry. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at the temples, and his jaw was covered with several days' worth of stubble. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, worn denim pants, and a bandana tied around his neck. "Bandits," she managed to croak out, her throat dry as sandpaper. "3 days ago. The wagon train. They took everything." Harrison's expression darkened, and he immediately reached for the canteen at his hip, uncorking it and holding it to her lips. "Drink slowly," he instructed, and Beatrice obeyed, taking small sips of the lukewarm water that nonetheless felt like the finest thing she had ever tasted. When she had drunk her fill, he examined her with a practiced eye, noting the dried blood, the swollen ankle, the sunburned skin on her face and arms. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. Beatrice tried, she truly did. She braced her hands against the ground and pushed, and Harrison supported her elbow, helping her rise. But the moment she put any weight on her injured ankle, white-hot pain shot through her leg and she gasped, swaying dangerously. Harrison caught her immediately, his strong arm steadying her, and she found herself leaning against his chest, breathing hard. She whispered, defeated and ashamed, "I cannot walk any more." Without hesitation, without even a moment of consideration, Harrison Tucker lifted her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. He held her securely against his chest, one arm beneath her knees and the other supporting her back, and when he looked down at her, his expression was set with determination and something else, something softer that made her breath catch. "Then I will walk for both of us," he said simply, and began carrying her toward his horse. Beatrice wanted to protest, to insist that she could manage, that she was not some helpless damsel who needed rescuing, but the truth was that she did need help, desperately, and this stranger was offering it without expecting anything in return. She could feel the strength in his arms, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, and for the first time in 3 days, she felt something resembling safety. Harrison managed to mount his horse while still holding her, a feat that required considerable skill and strength, and then settled her across his lap, keeping one arm around her waist to ensure she would not fall. "Kearney is too far," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I am taking you to the ranch. We have a bunkhouse with a spare room, and the foreman's wife knows medicine. She will take care of you." "I do not want to impose," Beatrice murmured, though even as she said it, she knew she had no other choice. "It is not an imposition," Harrison replied firmly. "It is what any decent person would do. Now hold on. I am going to take it slow so I do not jostle you too much, but we need to get you out of this sun." The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, and Beatrice drifted in and out of consciousness for much of it, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had been fighting for so long. Each time she stirred, she found herself still cradled securely in Harrison's arms, his body blocking the worst of the sun, his voice occasionally murmuring reassurances that she was safe, that they were almost there, that everything would be all right. When they finally arrived at the Tucker Ranch, a sprawling property with a main house, several outbuildings, corrals full of horses, and pastures dotted with cattle, Harrison called out for help. A woman in her 40s came rushing out of the main house, wiping her hands on her apron, her face creasing with concern when she saw the state Beatrice was in. "Lord have mercy," the woman exclaimed. "Harrison, bring her inside right now. What happened?" "Bandit attack on a wagon train," Harrison explained as he carefully dismounted, still holding Beatrice. "She has been walking for 3 days. Her ankle is badly swollen and she is suffering from exposure." The woman, who introduced herself as Martha Henley, the wife of the ranch foreman, immediately took charge. She directed Harrison to carry Beatrice upstairs to a small bedroom that was clean and simply furnished, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the prairie. He laid her down gently on the bed, and Beatrice could not suppress a groan of relief at finally being horizontal on something soft. Martha shooed Harrison out of the room so she could examine Beatrice properly, and for the next hour, Beatrice submitted to the older woman's ministrations. Martha helped her out of her filthy, torn clothing, gave her a sponge bath with cool water, applied salve to her sunburned skin, and carefully wrapped her swollen ankle with strips of clean linen soaked in a solution that smelled strongly of herbs. She also fed Beatrice a bowl of beef broth with soft bread, insisting that she eat slowly so as not to shock her system. "You are very lucky that Harrison found you when he did," Martha said as she worked. "Another day in that sun and you might not have made it. Where were you headed?" "California," Beatrice answered, her voice still hoarse. "My brother and his wife settled in Sacramento last year, and I was traveling to join them. I am a teacher, and my brother said there was a shortage of educated women out west. I thought it would be an adventure." Martha made a sympathetic sound. "Well, you certainly got more adventure than you bargained for. Do you have any other injuries besides the ankle? Any cuts or breaks?" "I do not think so," Beatrice said, mentally cataloging her various aches and pains. "Just bruises and scrapes. I was fortunate that I was gathering wildflowers away from the main camp when the bandits attacked. I heard the gunshots and hid in a ravine. By the time I came out, the wagons were burned and the others were gone. I found one woman who had been shot, but she died before I could help her. I took what supplies I could carry and started walking." "You did the right thing," Martha assured her. "And you are safe now. You will stay here until you are healed, and then we will figure out how to get you to your brother in California." Over the next few days, Beatrice remained in that small bedroom, her body slowly recovering from its ordeal. Martha checked on her regularly, bringing meals and changing the dressing on her ankle, which was gradually returning to its normal size. But it was Harrison who Beatrice found herself thinking about most often. He came to visit her each evening after finishing his work on the ranch, always knocking softly and waiting for permission before entering. He would sit in the straight-backed chair near the window and talk to her, telling her about his day, asking about her life before the attack, sharing stories about growing up in Nebraska. She learned that Harrison was 27 years old and had been working on the Tucker Ranch for the past 8 years. He had come west from Pennsylvania after his parents died of typhoid fever, seeking a fresh start and the open spaces that the frontier promised. He was good with horses, he said with a trace of pride, and had a particular talent for training the wild mustangs that were occasionally brought in from the prairie. The ranch owner, an older man named Edward Tucker, who was apparently a distant cousin, trusted Harrison with significant responsibilities and had even begun talking about making him a partner in the operation. "You like it here?" Beatrice asked one evening as the sun set beyond her window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Living on the ranch, I mean. Is it what you hoped for when you came west?" Harrison considered the question carefully, his long fingers toying with the brim of the hat resting on his knee. "It is a good life," he said finally. "Hard work, but honest. I like waking up early and knowing exactly what needs to be done. I like the horses and the open land. But sometimes I wonder if there is more." "More," Beatrice prompted. "More than just work," he clarified, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "A family, maybe. A wife. Children. Someone to build something with, not just for myself, but for a future. But women are scarce out here, and the few who come through are usually already spoken for or have their own plans that do not include settling on a ranch in the middle of Nebraska." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm, and she looked down at her hands, which were folded on top of the quilt. "I am sure you will find someone," she said softly. "Any woman would be fortunate to have a man like you." "Would you?" The question was so quiet, so unexpected, that for a moment Beatrice was not sure she had heard him correctly. "Would I what?" she asked, lifting her gaze back to his. "Would you be fortunate if it were you?" Harrison's expression was earnest, vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. "I know we have only known each other for a few days, and I know you have plans to go to California, but I cannot stop thinking about you, Beatrice. From the moment I saw you out there on the prairie, so determined to survive even when everything was against you, I felt something I have never felt before. And these past evenings, talking with you, learning about you, it has only grown stronger." Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. She had felt it too, that inexplicable pull toward this man who had literally carried her to safety. She had told herself it was merely gratitude, that her feelings were confused by the trauma she had experienced and the kindness he had shown. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. When Harrison entered the room each evening, her entire spirit seemed to lift. His voice soothed her in ways that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. And when he looked at her with those creek water eyes, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. "I do not know what I feel," she admitted honestly. "Everything has happened so quickly, and I am still trying to make sense of it all, but I will say this. I look forward to your visits more than I can properly express. And when I think about leaving here, about continuing on to California, there is a part of me that does not want to go." Harrison rose from his chair and crossed to the bed, kneeling beside it so that he was at eye level with her. "Then stay," he said simply. Stay here. Get to know me properly. Give whatever this is between us a chance to grow. If after some time you decide that California is still where you want to be, I will personally escort you there and make sure you arrive safely. But if you decide that maybe, just maybe, Nebraska has something worth staying for, then I promise you I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice. Beatrice reached out and touched his face, her fingers trembling slightly as they traced the line of his jaw. That is a bold promise to make to someone you barely know, she whispered. I know enough, Harrison replied, turning his head slightly to press a kiss against her palm. I know you are brave and resourceful. I know you have a quick mind and a kind heart. I know that when you laugh at something I say, it is the best sound I have ever heard. And I know that I would be a fool to let you ride out of my life without at least trying to convince you to stay. Over the following weeks, as Beatrice's ankle healed and she regained her strength, she and Harrison spent increasing amounts of time together. He took her on slow walks around the ranch property, letting her lean on his arm when her ankle grew tired. He introduced her to his favorite horses, including a beautiful chestnut mare named Copper who nuzzled Beatrice's hand looking for treats. He showed her the vast expanse of the prairie from horseback, riding slowly with her seated in front of him, his arms bracketing her body as he held the reins. Beatrice, in turn, began making herself useful around the ranch. She helped Martha with the cooking and the endless mending that a household full of working men required. She taught reading and writing to some of the younger ranch hands who had never had the opportunity for formal education. She organized the ranch's small library of books, creating a lending system that proved surprisingly popular. And she found herself increasingly imagining what it would be like to make this place her permanent home. The feelings between her and Harrison deepened with each passing day. What had begun as attraction and gratitude evolved into something far more profound. She loved the way he was unfailingly gentle with her, but never treated her as fragile. She loved his quiet competence, the way he could soothe a spooked horse or fix a broken fence post with equal skill. She loved the sound of his laughter and the way his entire face transformed when he smiled. She loved the respect he showed everyone on the ranch, from the owner to the newest hired hand, and Harrison made no secret of his growing devotion to her. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, the same kind she had been gathering when the wagon train was attacked, as if to create new, happier memories. He saved the best portions of meat at meals for her plate. He listened with genuine interest when she talked about her dreams of teaching, and surprised her by suggesting that perhaps Kearney could use a schoolteacher if she were interested in staying in the area. 2 months after Harrison had found her on the prairie, Edward Tucker, the ranch owner, invited both of them to dinner at the main house. Edward was a widower in his 60s with white hair and shrewd blue eyes that missed very little. Over a meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, he studied Beatrice with frank curiosity. "Martha tells me you have been a godsend around here," he said, passing her the bowl of green beans. "Says the men have never been so well organized, and the mending pile has actually disappeared for the first time in years." Beatrice smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I am grateful for the opportunity to make myself useful. You and Martha have shown me such kindness. I want to repay it in whatever way I can." "Harrison also tells me you are a teacher," Edward continued, glancing at his young ranch manager with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what was developing between them. "That true?" "Yes, sir," Beatrice confirmed. "I taught at a girls' school in Boston for 3 years before deciding to go west." Edward nodded thoughtfully, cutting his chicken with precise movements. "You know, The town of Kearney has been trying to establish a proper school for the past year. They have the building and some basic supplies, but they cannot find a qualified teacher willing to come out this far. The county would pay a decent salary, and there is a small house that comes with the position. Might be something worth looking into if you were planning to stay in the area. The implication was clear, and Beatrice felt her cheeks flush. She glanced at Harrison, who was watching her with an expression of barely contained hope, and felt her heart swell with emotion. "That does sound like something worth looking into," she said carefully. After dinner, Harrison walked her back to the bunkhouse, where she was still staying in her small room. The night air was cool and filled with the chirping of crickets, and overhead, the stars stretched out in a glittering canopy that never failed to take her breath away. They stopped outside the bunkhouse door, neither of them quite ready to say good night. "He knows," Beatrice said softly, looking up at Harrison. "Edward, he knows how we feel about each other." "Of course he knows," Harrison replied with a slight smile. "Everyone knows." "I have not exactly been subtle about it. The other ranch hands tease me mercilessly." "Does it bother you, the teasing?" "Not even a little bit." Harrison took both of her hands in his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on her knuckles. "Beatrice, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning excited just because I know I will see you. And I go to bed every night hoping that you will decide to stay, that you will give us a real chance. I am not a wealthy man, and I cannot offer you the luxuries you might have had in Boston or the adventures you might find in California. But I can offer you my heart, completely and without reservation. I can offer you a good life here with me, building something together. And I can promise you that I will love you and respect you and work every day to make you happy, for as long as you will have me." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. She had not cried since those terrible days after the wagon train attack, but now the emotions welled up, overwhelming in their intensity. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I am staying. I do not need more time to decide. I am staying because I love you. I think I started loving you the moment you picked me up off that prairie and promised to walk for both of us. You gave me back my hope when I had nothing left, and you have shown me what it means to be truly cared for. Of course I am staying." Harrison's face lit up with joy so pure and complete that it was almost painful to witness. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around once before setting her back down and cupping her face in his hands. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Beatrice breathed. "Please, yes." The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tender and passionate, tentative and sure, full of promise and possibility. Harrison's lips were soft against hers, and he kissed her with a reverence that made her feel cherished and desired in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Beatrice could not stop smiling. "I am going to marry you," Harrison said, resting his forehead against hers. "Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but soon. I am going to marry you and build you a house, and fill it with so much love that you will never regret choosing Nebraska over California." "I could never regret choosing you," Beatrice replied, and kissed him again. The next few months passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Beatrice met with the Kearney Town Council and was officially hired as the schoolteacher, with classes set to begin in January of 1876. The small house that came with the position needed some repairs, and Harrison spent every spare moment working on it, enlisting the help of several ranch hands to fix the roof, replace broken windows, and repaint the walls. Beatrice threw herself into preparing curriculum and gathering supplies, corresponding with her brother in California to have some of her teaching materials sent to Nebraska. Harrison also began construction on a larger house on a piece of land that Edward Tucker sold to him at a generous price. It was located at the edge of the ranch property, close enough that Harrison could still help manage the operation, but far enough to provide privacy for the family they both hoped to build. The house would not be completed until the following summer, but Harrison drew up the plans with Beatrice's input, making sure to include a large kitchen, a parlor for entertaining, and enough bedrooms for the children they wanted. They were married in late November of 1875 in a simple ceremony at the church in Kearney. Beatrice wore a dress that Martha had helped her sew from cream-colored silk that Harrison had ordered specially from Omaha. Harrison wore a new black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, and when he saw Beatrice walking toward him down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears that he did not bother to hide. Martha and Edward Tucker stood as their witnesses, along with several of the ranch hands and townspeople who had grown fond of the couple. When the minister asked Harrison if he would take Beatrice to be his lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, Harrison's voice rang out clear and strong. "I will. I have already promised to walk for both of us when she cannot walk herself, and I will keep that promise for the rest of our lives." Beatrice was crying openly by the time it was her turn to say her vows, and her voice shook with emotion as she promised to love, honor, and cherish Harrison Tucker until death parted them. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, and told Harrison he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was met with cheers and applause from the gathered assembly. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch, with Martha and several of the other ranch wives preparing a feast that included roasted beef, potatoes, fresh bread, pies, and even a small wedding cake. There was music and dancing, and Harrison proved to be a surprisingly skilled dancer, twirling Beatrice around the barn that had been cleared for the occasion until she was dizzy with happiness and laughter. Later that night, in the small house in Kearney where they would live until their own house was completed, Harrison carried Beatrice over the threshold as tradition dictated. He set her down gently in the bedroom, which was lit by candles and warmed by a fire in the small hearth, and looked at her with an expression of such love and desire that it made her tremble. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly, reaching up to remove the pins from her hair, letting the long brown waves fall free around her shoulders. "A little," Beatrice admitted, "but I trust you. I love you." "I love you too," Harrison murmured, kissing her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person, and I promise to be gentle with you." He kept that promise, undressing her slowly and reverently, worshipping every inch of her body with his hands and mouth until she was gasping his name. When they finally came together, becoming husband and wife in the fullest sense, it was with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaken and transformed. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Beatrice's head resting on Harrison's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Harrison asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "For finding me. For saving me. For loving me. For giving me a life I did not even know I wanted until I met you." Harrison tightened his arms around her. "You saved me too, you know. I was just going through the motions before you came along. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to look forward to the future." "We saved each other, Beatrice." Beatrice began teaching at the Kearney School in January of 1876, and she quickly became beloved by both her students and their parents. She had 14 pupils ranging in age from 6 to 15, and she taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography with a patience and enthusiasm that made even the most reluctant learners eager to participate. Harrison often stopped by the school during his trips into town, bringing her lunch or simply wanting to see her face during the day. The children quickly figured out who he was and teased their teacher mercilessly about her handsome cowboy husband, which only made Beatrice love them more. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Harrison continued managing the ranch with increasing authority as Edward Tucker gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations. Beatrice taught during the day and spent her evenings with her husband, sometimes grading papers or preparing lessons while he worked on leather tack or read by the fire. On weekends, they would ride out to check on the progress of their house, which was rising slowly but steadily from the prairie. By spring, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had wanted to be certain before telling Harrison. When she finally shared the news with him over dinner one evening, Harrison's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the ranch, then picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests that he needed to be careful now. "Careful," he repeated, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Beatrice, you walked for 3 days through the prairie with a twisted ankle after surviving a bandit attack. You are the strongest person I know, but I promise I will take care of you through every moment of this. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I am here." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from terrible nausea during the first few months and had to reduce her teaching hours. As summer arrived and her belly swelled, the heat became oppressive, and she found herself exhausted by even the smallest tasks. Harrison proved true to his word, taking over all the household chores without complaint and spending his evenings rubbing her aching feet and back. Martha became a frequent visitor, offering advice and remedies based on her own experiences raising 4 children. Their house was completed in July of 1876, and they moved in despite Beatrice being 7 months pregnant and moving slowly. The house was everything they had imagined, spacious and well-built, with large windows that let in plenty of light and a wraparound porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the prairie. Harrison had carved a sign above the front door that read, "Tucker Family Home Established 1876." And when Beatrice saw it, she cried happy tears yet again. In September, after 14 hours of labor assisted by Martha and the doctor from Kearney, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Henry Samuel Tucker, and the moment Harrison held his son for the first time, cradling the tiny, red-faced infant against his chest with a mixture of awe and terror, Beatrice fell in love with her husband all over again. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You are amazing, you did such a good job, he is absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Beatrice said weakly from the bed, exhausted but unable to stop smiling. "I can already tell." Henry proved to be a relatively easy baby, much to his parents' relief. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, and Harrison was a devoted father from the very beginning. He would wake in the night when Henry cried and bring the baby to Beatrice for feeding, then walk the floor with his son on his shoulder, patting the small back and murmuring soft words until Henry fell back asleep. He built a beautiful cradle that rocked with the slightest touch, and he was constantly showing off his son to anyone who would pay attention. Beatrice returned to teaching in January of 1877, bringing Henry with her to the schoolhouse. The older girls took turns helping watch the baby when Beatrice needed to focus on instruction, and Henry grew up surrounded by books and learning and the sound of children's voices. It was an unconventional arrangement, but it worked for their family. Over the next few years, their family continued to grow. A daughter, Rose Martha Tucker, was born in 1878, followed by another son, William Edward Tucker, in 1880. Harrison expanded their house to accommodate the growing family, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Edward Tucker retired fully and made Harrison a full partner in the ranch, which now bore both their names. Beatrice eventually stopped teaching full-time to focus on raising her children, but continued to tutor students privately and remained active in the community. Through it all, through the hard times and the good times, the droughts and the abundant harvests, the long winters and the glorious summers, Harrison and Beatrice remained deeply, fiercely in love. They still took evening rides together when they could, just the two of them, leaving the children with Martha or one of the other ranch families. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sky change colors. And they still talked for hours about everything and nothing, never running out of things to say to each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary in November of 1885, Harrison took Beatrice on a ride out to the spot on the prairie where he had first found her. He had marked the location years earlier with a simple stone cairn, and they visited it occasionally to remember how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked as they stood beside the cairn, his arm around her waist. "Not going to California, not seeing what else was out there." Beatrice leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and hay and the outdoors. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "That day when I told you I could not walk anymore and you promised to walk for both of us, you gave me everything I did not know I was searching for. You gave me love and home and family and purpose. You gave me a life that is richer and fuller than anything I could have imagined. California has my brother, but Nebraska has you and our children and our life together. That is all I need." Harrison turned her to face him, his hands framing her face the way he had on their wedding day and countless times since. His hair was starting to show touches of gray at the temples now, and there were laugh lines around his eyes, but he was still the same man who had lifted her off the prairie floor a decade ago. "I would do it all again," he said quietly. "Every single moment. Finding you that day was the best thing that ever happened to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "We happened to each other," Beatrice corrected, reaching up to kiss him. "And we will keep happening to each other for the rest of our lives." They stood there for a long time, holding each other on the prairie where their story had begun, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. The wind whispered through the grass around them, carrying the scent of earth and sky and infinite possibility, and overhead the clouds moved in their eternal patterns, marking the passage of time in the place where a cowboy had once promised to walk for both of them. By 1890, the Tucker Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region, known for breeding quality horses and maintaining strong cattle herds. Henry, now 13, was already showing a natural aptitude for ranch management and spent every spare moment working alongside his father. Rose, at 11, had inherited her mother's love of learning and was the top student in the Kearney school. William, the youngest at 9, was the adventurous one, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief that reminded Beatrice of what she imagined Harrison must have been like as a child. Beatrice had recently been elected to the Kearney School Board and was advocating for expanding education opportunities in the region. She wrote articles for the local newspaper about the importance of literacy and corresponded with other educators across Nebraska. Harrison supported her ambitions completely, proud of his wife's intelligence and drive, never threatened by her accomplishments. They hosted regular gatherings at their home, opening their doors to neighbors, ranch hands, travelers, and anyone who needed a meal or a place to stay. Their house was known for its warmth and hospitality, and their children were growing up understanding the importance of generosity and community. Martha and Edward Tucker were frequent visitors, having become like surrogate parents to Beatrice and doting grandparents to the Tucker children. One evening in late spring, as the family sat around the dinner table sharing stories from their day, Rose suddenly asked a question that made both her parents pause. "Papa, how did you and Mama meet? I know it was on the prairie, but what were you doing out there?" Harrison and Beatrice exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them as it so often did after 15 years of marriage. They had told the children parts of the story before, but had never shared the full details, not wanting to frighten them with tales of bandit attacks and near-death experiences. "I was coming back from delivering horses to a ranch near the Platte River," Harrison began, setting down his fork. "And your mother was on a wagon train traveling to California. But the wagon train was attacked," Beatrice continued, taking over the narrative, "by bad men who wanted to steal supplies. I was not with the main group when it happened, and when I came back, everyone was gone. I started walking toward Kearney, which was the nearest town I knew of, but I had twisted my ankle, and after 3 days, I could not walk any further. That is when your father found me," Beatrice said, reaching across the table to take Harrison's hand. "I was lying in the middle of the prairie, completely exhausted and in pain. I did not think anyone would come, but he did." Henry was leaning forward now, completely absorbed in the story. "What did he do?" Harrison smiled at the memory. "I asked if she could stand, and she tried, but her ankle was too injured. She whispered that she could not walk anymore, and I told her that if she could not walk, then I would walk for both of us. So I picked her up and carried her back to my horse and brought her to the ranch." "Papa carried Mama all the way back?" William asked, his eyes wide. "Well, mostly on horseback," Harrison clarified with a laugh. "But yes, I made sure she got somewhere safe where she could heal." "And then you fell in love?" Rose asked, her young, romantic heart clearly delighted by the story. "Then we fell in love," Beatrice confirmed. "Your father took care of me while I recovered, and we spent time talking and getting to know each other. I had planned to continue to California, but the more time I spent with him, the more I realized that what I was looking for was right here. So I stayed. We got married that November, and then we had you 3, and we lived happily ever after." "Like a fairy tale," Rose sighed. "Better than a fairy tale," Harrison said, squeezing Beatrice's hand, "because it is real." That night, after the children were asleep, Harrison and Beatrice sat on their porch as they did most evenings, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Beatrice rested her head on Harrison's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, thinking about how miraculous it was that their lives had intersected in that particular moment on that particular day. "You think things happen for a reason?" she asked quietly. "Or is it all just chance?" Harrison considered the question, his arm tightening around her. "I think some of it is chance and some of it is choice. It was chance that I was riding that particular route on that particular day. It was chance that you had wandered away from the wagon train gathering flowers. But it was choice that I stopped to help you instead of riding on. It was choice that you decided to stay instead of continuing to California. It was choice that we opened our hearts to each other and decided to build this life together." "Good choices," Beatrice murmured. "The best choices," Harrison agreed. As the years continued to pass, the Tucker family remained strong and close-knit. Henry took over more responsibilities on the ranch, proving himself to be a capable and fair-minded manager. Rose eventually went to the State College in Lincoln to study literature and education, becoming the first in the family to pursue higher education. William developed a passion for horses that rivaled his father's, and began breeding a new line of working horses that gained recognition throughout Nebraska and beyond. Harrison and Beatrice grew older together gracefully, their hair turning gray, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and full lives, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with time, maturing like fine wine, becoming something rich and complex and endlessly sustaining. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1900, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the extended family of ranch workers and town friends who had become such an important part of their lives. Martha Henley, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, made a toast that brought tears to many eyes. 25 years ago, I watched Harrison Tucker carry a broken, exhausted young woman into this ranch, and I thought I was just witnessing an act of kindness, Martha said, raising her glass. But I was actually witnessing the beginning of one of the greatest love stories I have ever known. Beatrice and Harrison, you have shown all of us what it means to truly commit to another person, to build a life based on mutual respect and deep affection, to weather storms together and celebrate joys together. You have raised wonderful children who are now raising wonderful children of their own. You have contributed immeasurably to this community, and most importantly, you have loved each other with a constancy and devotion that inspires everyone who knows you. Here is to 25 more years together. The gathering erupted in cheers and applause, and Harrison pulled Beatrice close, kissing her soundly in front of everyone. Their children groaned good-naturedly, as they always did when their parents displayed affection, but they were also smiling, knowing how fortunate they were to have grown up watching a love story unfold in real time. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests began departing, Harrison led Beatrice outside to the porch where they had spent countless hours over the years. The night was clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers from Beatrice's carefully tended garden. 25 years, Beatrice said wonderingly. It seems like yesterday and also like an entire lifetime. Both, Harrison agreed. I can still remember exactly how you looked lying in that prairie grass, so determined to survive even when everything seemed hopeless. And I can remember our wedding day, and the day each of our children was born, and 1,000 ordinary days in between. It all matters, Beatrice. Every single day with you matters. Beatrice turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest where she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. You kept your promise, you know. You said you would walk for both of us, and you have. Every time I have stumbled or fallen, every time life has knocked me down, you have been there to help me back up. You have been my partner and my strength and my greatest joy. And you have been mine, Harrison replied, covering her hands with his own. I found you on that prairie, but you saved me, Beatrice. You gave meaning to my life. You made me a better man. Everything good in my life flows from that moment when I decided to stop and help a stranger in need. They stood together in the darkness, two people who had chosen each other again and again over the course of a quarter-century, who had built something beautiful and lasting out of a chance encounter on the Nebraska prairie. The house behind them was full of family and love. The land around them was prosperous and well-tended, and their future, however many years it might hold, stretched before them bright with promise. As they finally went inside for the night, Harrison paused at the doorway and looked back at the prairie that rolled away into the distance, barely visible in the starlight. He thought about that young man he had been, riding home from a horse delivery, who had made the decision to investigate what looked like a bundle of clothes lying in the grass. He thought about how easily he might have ridden past, how different his life would have been if he had not stopped. But he had stopped. He had offered help to someone who needed it, and in return he had received everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever dreamed possible. "Come to bed," Beatrice called from inside. "We have a long day tomorrow." Harrison smiled and closed the door behind him, leaving the prairie to its ancient rhythms, grateful beyond measure for the life he had been given and the woman who had made it all worthwhile. The Tucker legacy continued long after Harrison and Beatrice were gone. Their children and grandchildren remained on the land, maintaining the ranch and contributing to the community, carrying forward the values of hard work, compassion, and unwavering commitment that their parents and grandparents had exemplified. The story of how Harrison Tucker had found Beatrice Sullivan on the prairie and promised to walk for both of them became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what love could be when two people truly committed to each other. In the decades and centuries that followed, as the world changed around it, the Tucker Ranch endured. The house that Harrison built for his bride stood strong against prairie winds and harsh winters, sheltering generation after generation of Tuckers. And though the specific memories of Harrison and Beatrice eventually faded into the soft focus of history, the love they had shared continued to ripple outward, influencing lives they would never know, creating a legacy that extended far beyond the boundaries of their ranch or even their lifetimes. Because love, true love, the kind that is built on sacrifice and choice and daily recommitment, never truly ends. It transforms and perpetuates itself, becoming woven into the very fabric of the world, making it just a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit more hopeful. And somewhere out on the Nebraska prairie, where the grass still grows wild and the sky still stretches forever in all directions, the wind still whispers the story of a cowboy who found a woman in need and promised to walk for both of them. It is a story about rescue and redemption, about chance and choice, about the miraculous ways that two lives can intersect and create something infinitely greater than the sum of their parts. It is a story about love. Real, true, lasting love. The kind worth building a life around. The kind that endures. In their final years together, Harrison and Beatrice Tucker lived quietly and contentedly in the house he had built for her so many years before. Their children were grown and successful. Their grandchildren were healthy and thriving, and they could look back on their lives with the deep satisfaction of knowing they had lived well and loved deeply. Harrison passed away first in the winter of 1915 at the age of 65 after a brief illness. He died in his own bed in his own home, surrounded by his family, with Beatrice holding his hand. His last words to her were simple and perfect. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for the best 40 years of my life." Beatrice lived for 5 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, working in her garden, and writing down the story of her life with Harrison, so that future generations would know where they came from and what their family was built on. She never remarried, never even considered it, because as far as she was concerned, she had already experienced the great love of her life. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1920, at the age of 66. Her family found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Harrison for so many years, with a smile on her face and a photograph of her husband clutched in her hand. They buried her next to Harrison in the small cemetery outside Kearney, under a headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription. He walked for both of them. And though they were gone, the story of their love lived on, passed down through generations of Tuckers. A reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures are not the ones we plan, but the ones we stumble into when we are brave enough to help a stranger, vulnerable enough to accept help when we need it, and wise enough to recognize love when it appears before us on a lonely prairie in the fading light of an August afternoon. The end of their earthly story was not really an ending at all, but rather a continuation, a transformation, a becoming part of something larger. The land they had worked continued to sustain future generations. The house they had filled with love continued to shelter family. The values they had lived by continued to guide their descendants. And the love they had shared, that fierce and tender devotion that had begun with a promise to walk for both of them, continued to inspire everyone who heard their story. Years later, when the Tucker Ranch celebrated its 100th anniversary, one of Harrison and Beatrice's great-great-grandchildren stood before the assembled family and told the story once again. She spoke of a young woman who had lost everything but not her determination to survive. She spoke of a young man who had chosen kindness when he could have ridden past. She spoke of a promise made on the prairie and kept for a lifetime. And she spoke of the legacy they had left behind, not just in land or wealth, but in the example they had set of what it meant to truly love another person. They saved each other, she concluded, her voice strong and clear. And in doing so, they created all of this, all of us. We exist because they chose love over fear, commitment over convenience, and each other over everything else. That is the Tucker legacy. That is what we carry forward. The family gathered there that day, dozens of them spanning multiple generations, all descended from that chance meeting on the Nebraska prairie in August of 1875, nodded and applauded and raised their glasses in tribute to ancestors they had never met, but whose influence they felt in every aspect of their lives. And if you went out to that prairie today, to the spot marked by a stone cairn that has been maintained and rebuilt by Tucker family members for over a century, you might feel something in the air, something indefinable but unmistakable. It is the echo of a promise made and kept, the residue of love that was so powerful it literally changed the course of multiple lives. It is the presence of two souls who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting in the midst of a wild and untamed land. The story of Harrison Tucker and Beatrice Sullivan is not unique in its individual elements. The American West was full of stories of hardship and rescue, of settlers making new lives in difficult circumstances, of people finding love in unexpected places. But every love story is unique to the people living it, and to Harrison and Beatrice, theirs was the only story that mattered. It was their story, written in choices and sacrifices, in laughter and tears, in the dailiness of shared life and the extraordinary moments that punctuate it. It was a story that began with, "I cannot walk anymore," and was answered with, "Then I will walk for both of us." And it was a story that lasted for a lifetime and beyond. Now, more than a century after they lived and loved and built their life together, we can look back and see the full arc of what they created. We can trace the lineages that flowed from them, the lives that were made possible because they chose each other. We can appreciate the courage it took for Beatrice to accept help and to stay in a strange place with people she did not know. We can admire the immediate compassion Harrison showed to a stranger in need and his willingness to open his heart so completely. We can marvel at how they navigated the challenges of their time, the harsh conditions of frontier life, the isolation, the hard physical work, the constant uncertainty about weather and crops and survival. But more than anything, we can hold up their story as an example of what is possible when two people truly commit to each other. Not a fairy tale romance without conflict or difficulty, but a real partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. A love that grew deeper with time rather than fading. A marriage that weathered storms and celebrated joys with equal grace. A family built on a foundation so solid that it continued to support and sustain generations long after the builders were gone. This is the true power of love. Not that it makes life easy, but that it makes life meaningful. Not that it solves all problems, but that it gives us someone to face those problems with. Not that it guarantees happiness, but that it creates the possibility of happiness even in difficult circumstances. Harrison Tucker did not just carry Beatrice Sullivan to safety that day in August of 1875. He carried hope and possibility and future. And Beatrice, in accepting his help and eventually his love, carried those things right back to him. Together, they created something that neither could have created alone. Together, they walked through life supporting each other, lifting each other, being there for each other through everything that came their way. That is the legacy. That is the lesson. That is the story worth telling and retelling until the prairie grass stops growing and the stars stop shining overhead. A cowboy found a woman who could not walk anymore. He promised to walk for both of them, and he kept that promise until his last breath. She stayed with him, loved him, built a life with him, and kept her own promise to be his partner in everything. And together, they created a legacy of love that endures. This is how love stories should end. Not with a question mark or a cliff to fall from, but with a period, a sense of completion, a satisfaction in knowing that the people we cared about lived full lives and loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. Harrison and Beatrice Tucker did all of that and more. Their story is complete, their love is eternal, and their legacy continues in the land they worked, the children they raised, and the example they set for all who came after them. They lived. They loved. They built something lasting. And when their time on earth was done, they left behind not just descendants, but a story that reminds us all of what is possible when we choose kindness over indifference, when we choose love over fear, and when we choose to walk together through whatever life brings, supporting each other every step of the way. This is the story of Harrison Tucker and Beatrice Sullivan, two people who met by chance on the Nebraska prairie in 1875 and chose to build a life together that would echo through the generations. It is a story of rescue and love, of promises made and kept, of hardship endured and joy embraced. It is a story that deserves to be remembered and celebrated, not because it is extraordinary, but because it shows us what ordinary people can create when they commit fully to each other and to the life they are building together. And so we remember them. Harrison, who had the compassion to stop for a stranger and the courage to open his heart to love. Beatrice, who had the strength to survive impossible circumstances and the wisdom to recognize a good man when she met one. Together, they were greater than either could have been alone. Together, they created a legacy of love that will endure as long as the prairie grass grows and the Nebraska sky stretches overhead in that vast, eternal expanse of blue. Their story is complete. Their love endures. And we, who hear their story more than a century later, can take heart from knowing that love like theirs is possible, that promises like Harrison's can be kept, and that sometimes, when we are at our lowest point and cannot walk anymore, someone will come along who will walk for both of us, carrying us to safety, and if we are very lucky, carrying us all the way home.